After Daniel's passing, the house felt like a shell, beautiful from the outside but hollow within. Emily often walked through it in silence, her hand gliding over the polished wooden banister that Daniel had insisted on installing himself. Every corner carried traces of him, his books on the shelf, his coffee cup still in the kitchen cabinet, his scent fading from the pillow she refused to wash. Losing him had left a gap she didn't know how to fill. Her days had become predictable. She woke up early, made tea, sat by the window, and stared at the garden Daniel once loved. She tried to busy herself with reading or baking, but the loneliness always found its way back. It was quiet, too quiet, and the quietness made her think too much. Ethan, her late husband's son, was the only person who called regularly. He had always been polite but distant when Daniel was alive. They got along, but their relationship was careful. It's like two people learning how to be in the same picture without stepping on each other's space. After Daniel's death, that distance slowly faded. At first, Ethan called to check on her short, polite conversations about bills, repairs, or groceries. But over time, he started staying on the phone longer. He asked about her garden, about her writing, about how she really felt. His voice had warmth that reminded her of Daniel. But his way of listening was gentler, more present. One Sunday afternoon, as Emily sat reading in the living room, she heard a car pull up. When she opened the door, Ethan stood there holding his camera bag. His smile was faint but kind. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said. "Of course not," Emily replied, a little surprised. "Come in." He stepped inside, looking around as if seeing the house differently now. "I've been working on something," he said, unzipping his camera bag. "A photo series. It's about people who've gone through change, grief, recovery, rediscovery. Real emotion. Real stories." Emily listened, curious. She knew he was a photographer, but she had never really seen his work. He hesitated before adding, "I want to include you in it. If you're comfortable." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "Ethan, I'm hardly photogenic. You should find someone younger, or at least someone who knows how to pose." But Ethan smiled in that calm way of his. "I don't want a model. I want authenticity. You've lived through something real. That's what I'm trying to capture. Truth, not perfection." His sincerity caught her off guard. It had been months since anyone had looked at her with such belief. "You really think I could fit into that?" she asked. "I don't just think it," he said, adjusting his camera strap. "I know it." She didn't agree right away, but his words lingered long after he left. That night, she stood in front of the mirror, studying her reflection, the fine lines near her eyes, the tiredness that came from grief. And yet, beneath all that, a quiet strength. Maybe he was right. Maybe there was something worth capturing. A few days later, she called him. "When do you want to start?" she asked simply. Ethan's tone brightened. "This Saturday. Morning light is perfect for portraits." When Saturday came, Emily spent more time getting ready than she'd admit. She wore a soft cream sweater and let her hair fall naturally. She didn't wear much makeup, just enough to feel presentable. When Ethan arrived, his energy filled the space, calm, focused, and creative. He walked around the living room, adjusting curtains, checking how the light fell on the furniture. "Let's use this window," he said. "It catches the best light around this hour." Emily sat by the window as he began setting up. The first few minutes felt awkward. She didn't know where to look or what to do with her hands. But Ethan's voice guided her gently. "Don't pose," he said. "Just be yourself. Think about something peaceful, something you love." She took a slow breath, thinking about Daniel, about the way he used to hum while reading the newspaper. Her eyes softened. The camera clicked. "Perfect," Ethan said quietly, his voice warm but professional. "That's exactly what I wanted." The more he photographed her, the easier it became. He asked her to look out the window, to smile if she wanted, to close her eyes if she felt like it. The simplicity of it, the quiet rhythm of shutter sounds, felt oddly healing. After about an hour, he paused. "Let's take a break," he said, lowering the camera. She made tea while he looked through the photos. When she brought him a cup, he turned the camera around to show her. The images made her heart stop. She didn't look like she imagined, not just older, but layered, like someone who had lived and survived something deep. Her expression carried both pain and beauty. She barely recognized herself there. "Powerful," she said softly. "They're honest," Ethan replied. "That's what I wanted." She glanced at him, noticing the way he watched her, not as someone pitying a widow, but as an artist truly seeing his subject. It stirred something inside her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Over the next few weeks, their sessions became more frequent. Sometimes they worked indoors, sometimes in the garden. Each time, Ethan captured something different: her laughter, her stillness, her gaze when lost in thought. He was patient, never demanding, and always respectful. But as he photographed her, something subtle began to change. The distance that had once existed between them started to fade. Their conversations stretched beyond photography. They talked about art, love, fear, and the quiet ache of missing someone who'll never return. One afternoon, while reviewing photos together, Emily noticed one image, her face half lit, her eyes distant. It looked raw, almost too real. "I don't know if I like that one," she admitted. Ethan looked at it closely. "It's my favorite. It shows how strong you are, even when you don't feel it." Her chest tightened at his words. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear that after he left that day. Emily sat alone, scrolling through the images he'd captured. Each one told a story, not of loss, but of rediscovery. She began to see herself not as someone broken, but as someone changing, slowly finding her way back to life. She began looking forward to their sessions more than she wanted to admit. The house felt different when Ethan was around, brighter, lighter. The sound of the camera clicking had become a kind of music that filled the silence Daniel had left behind. One day, during a late afternoon shoot, Ethan asked her to stand by the old piano. Daniel had loved that piano. She hadn't touched it in months. When she placed her fingers on the keys, her eyes filled with tears. Ethan quietly lifted the camera, capturing that moment not to invade, but to preserve. When he showed her the picture, she saw herself differently. "It's like I'm saying goodbye," she whispered. "Or maybe," Ethan said softly, "you're saying hello again." That evening, after he left, Emily sat at the piano again. This time she played a single note, hesitant but real. For the first time in months, she didn't feel alone in the house. Little did she know, what began as a simple photography project would soon uncover emotions neither of them expected. Weeks passed, and the house that once echoed with silence began to hum with life again. Ethan visited almost every other day, carrying his camera, and that calm energy that somehow made Emily feel lighter. He often arrived early, catching the golden morning light for their sessions. Each time he found a new corner of the house to work in, sometimes the sunroom, sometimes the porch, sometimes even the garden that Daniel had loved so much. It amazed Emily how natural it had become. She no longer hesitated in front of the lens. The stiffness she once felt was gone. Ethan had a way of making her forget that he was even there. He would talk to her while shooting about his projects, his time in New York, his struggles as a freelance artist. His openness made her comfortable, made her want to share too. One morning, as they prepared for another session, Ethan said something that stayed with her. "You know, Emily, photography isn't about beauty. It's about truth. A good photo captures the kind of honesty most people hide." She smiled faintly. "And what truth do you see in me, Ethan?" He looked at her through his camera lens and said, "I see someone learning to breathe again." Those words settled deep in her heart. She didn't reply, but she carried them with her. Later that day, they decided to move their session outdoors. The garden had begun to bloom again, a mix of roses, wild lavender, and lilies, just as Daniel had planted them years ago. Emily hadn't stepped into it much since his passing, but that morning, the air smelled of renewal. Ethan adjusted his lens and smiled. "This garden is a story on its own," he said. "Let's tell it." As she walked among the flowers, Ethan followed quietly, capturing her movements. She didn't pose. She just existed, brushing her hand over petals, looking at the sky, pausing near Daniel's favorite rosebush. The warmth of the sunlight, the sound of the wind, and the rhythm of the camera's clicks created a harmony that soothed something inside her. When Ethan showed her the photos afterward, she was surprised. The images felt alive, not sad, but full of quiet strength. She saw a woman who was healing, rediscovering herself one moment at a time. "I didn't think I could look like that anymore," she said softly. Ethan smiled. "You didn't look like that before. You are like that now. That's the difference." Their connection deepened, not through words but through shared silences. Sometimes they'd sit after a session and just talk about Daniel, about art, about how strange life could be. Emily found herself laughing again, something she hadn't done freely in months. One afternoon, as they looked over a batch of photos, Ethan said, "You know, I think I've found the theme of my entire series. It's not about grief. It's about transformation. You inspired that." The word inspired caught her off guard. She wasn't used to being anyone's inspiration. "I'm not sure I did much," she replied. But Ethan shook his head. "You did everything. You showed me that healing isn't just surviving, it's choosing to live again. That's what I want to capture." For a moment, their eyes met, not as stepmother and stepson, not as two people bound by loss, but as two souls who understood each other without needing to explain. Emily quickly looked away, heart fluttering with a feeling she didn't recognize, or maybe didn't want to, as summer approached. Ethan began preparing for his exhibition. He wanted to include Emily's portraits as the emotional centerpiece of his gallery. She was hesitant at first. "Ethan, these are personal. I'm not sure I want strangers to see this side of me." He placed his camera down gently. "I understand. But you've helped me tell a story that could help others too. People need to see that kind of courage." His sincerity disarmed her. Eventually, she agreed. "All right," she said, "but only if you promise to choose the photos carefully." He nodded. "You have my word." A few days later, Ethan brought printed versions of the portraits. He spread them across the dining table, each one more moving than the last. Emily was silent as she looked at them. There she was, not just a woman mourning her husband, but someone stepping out of the shadows. "This one," Ethan said, pointing to an image where she stood near the piano, her eyes soft and reflective. "This will be the main piece. It tells everything without saying a word." Emily looked at it and nodded slowly. "He would have liked that one," she whispered, thinking of Daniel. Ethan smiled gently. "I think so too." Over the next few days, they spent more time together than ever. Ethan often stayed for dinner, helping her cook or just keeping her company. Sometimes he'd show her other photos he'd taken strangers, cityscapes, the subtle poetry in everyday life. One evening, as rain tapped softly against the windows, they sat by the fireplace. Emily noticed how different Ethan had become, how much maturity and calmness he carried now. "Your father would be proud of you," she said suddenly. He looked down, thoughtful. "I hope so. I just wish I'd told him more about my work, about how much he meant to me." Emily reached out, resting her hand on his. "He knew Ethan. He always did." It was a small gesture, but it carried warmth. Neither spoke after that, but the silence between them was comforting. Not awkward. When the day of the exhibition came, Emily traveled with Ethan to New York. The gallery was filled with soft light, framed portraits, and the quiet hum of conversation. Ethan's collection drew attention immediately, especially the centerpiece photo of Emily. People stopped, stared, and whispered. A young woman beside her said to her friend, "There's something raw about that photo. It feels like she's remembering someone, but also forgiving herself." Emily's eyes watered. It was surreal to see her grief and healing displayed like art. She turned to Ethan, who was watching her from across the room. He smiled, and in that moment, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for what he'd done for her, but for reminding her that she was still alive, still capable of new beginnings. After the event, they walked back to the car under the city lights. "You did something beautiful, Ethan," she said. "You gave my pain a purpose." He glanced at her, his voice quiet. "No, Emily, you gave me a purpose." Her heart skipped a beat at the intensity in his tone, but she said nothing. She simply smiled, touched by the honesty in his words. The drive home was peaceful. The radio played softly, and the streetlights blurred like fading stars. When they reached her house, Ethan helped her carry in the framed portrait the gallery had gifted her. He hung it near the piano where Daniel's old photo once stood. Standing there, Emily realized something profound. Loss had changed her, but it hadn't ended her story. And maybe, just maybe, Ethan's arrival in her life wasn't a coincidence. That night, as she sat by the window, she thought about how far she'd come. The woman she saw in those photographs wasn't just Daniel's widow anymore. She was Emily, someone who had found the courage to live, to feel, to let the light in again. But she also knew something else now. Emotions, once reawakened, don't always stay still. And she couldn't deny that somewhere in her heart, something had shifted. What that meant, she didn't yet understand. But the truth would soon come to light in a way neither of them expected. After the exhibition, Emily's home felt strangely alive again. The framed photo Ethan had hung near the piano seemed to watch over her like a quiet companion. Every time she walked past it, she remembered how far she had come. But life, as she was beginning to understand, doesn't stop when you heal. It just changes direction. Ethan continued visiting, though now their sessions were more about companionship than art. Sometimes he'd bring new photos to show her. Other times he'd come with groceries or freshly baked bread from a nearby bakery. It became routine coffee in the morning, quiet talks in the evening, laughter echoing softly through rooms that once felt empty. One weekend, Ethan received an offer from a well-known gallery in Los Angeles to display his next project. It was a huge opportunity, and Emily could see how excited yet uncertain he was. "You have to go," she told him. "This is everything you've worked for." He looked at her, his expression serious. "I don't know if I want to leave yet." She smiled gently. "Ethan, you're not leaving anything behind. You're moving forward. That's what your father would have wanted." For a moment, he didn't respond. Then he nodded, the faintest smile touching his lips. "You always know what to say." The following days were filled with preparations, packing, arranging travel plans, organizing his collection. Emily helped however she could, though every box sealed felt like a small goodbye. The day before he left, they decided to take one last photo together, something simple, something just for them. Ethan set up the camera in the garden, the same place where their journey had quietly begun months ago. The light was golden, the air still. "Ready?" he asked. Emily nodded. As the shutter clicked, she suddenly realized how much she would miss him. Not just his presence, but the quiet understanding they shared. When he lowered the camera, their eyes met, and for a brief second, the world seemed to pause. But she quickly looked away, pretending to adjust a flower vase on the table. "You should print that one," she said. "It's a good memory." He smiled faintly. "Yeah, a really good one." The next morning, Ethan left for Los Angeles. Emily stood on the porch watching his car disappear down the road, feeling a strange mixture of pride and emptiness. The house was quiet again, too quiet. Days turned into weeks. Ethan called often, sometimes sending photos of his new life, studio setups, city lights, beaches glowing under sunset. His messages were full of excitement, yet his tone always softened when he talked to her. "I couldn't have done this without you," he said during one call. "You reminded me why I love photography." She smiled through the phone, though her heart ached in a way she couldn't quite explain. "You just needed someone to remind you of who you already were," she replied. The distance between them grew. But so did something else, a silent, unspoken connection that neither dared to define. One evening, a thick envelope arrived at Emily's door. Inside were prints of Ethan's new series, photos from across California. Beaches, old buildings, people lost in thought. But tucked among them was a smaller photo she hadn't seen before. It was their photo, the one taken in the garden before he left, on the back. He had written in neat handwriting, "Some moments don't fade, they just change shape." Emily sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at the picture. She realized then how deeply Ethan had become part of her healing, part of her life. It wasn't just about art or grief anymore. It was about connection, about finding light in unexpected places. Months passed before Ethan returned. His exhibition had been a success. Critics praised his work, calling it a portrait of hope reborn. When he walked through her front door again, Emily could see the change in him, more confident, more grounded, but still carrying that gentle warmth she'd come to know. "You did it," she said, smiling proudly. He set his bag down and looked around. "I couldn't wait to come back here. This place feels more like home than anywhere else." They spent the evening talking, catching up on everything he'd experienced, the people he met, the stories behind each photograph. When he showed her a picture of a quiet California sunset, she said softly, "It's beautiful. You really captured peace in it." Ethan smiled. "That's because I learned from you." For a while, silence filled the space between them, comfortable and warm. Emily realized she didn't feel lonely anymore. She wasn't sure if it was because of Ethan or because she had finally made peace with herself. Maybe both later that night. She asked him, "What's next for you?" He hesitated, then replied, "Actually, I was thinking of starting something new. A book about all this, about grief, love, and rediscovery. I want you to be part of it." She blinked, surprised. "Me, of course," he said. "You're the heart of it. Without your story, mine wouldn't exist." She laughed softly. "That sounds like too much credit," but he shook his head. "No, it's the truth." Over the following weeks, they worked side by side again, this time writing and organizing photos for his book. It felt natural, long days spent sorting through memories, long nights talking about life. Sometimes, when she saw him concentrating, Emily caught herself smiling without realizing it. There was something peaceful about watching him work, about knowing he was where he belonged. Then, one rainy evening, as thunder rolled in the distance, the power went out. They lit candles and continued sorting photos by candlelight. The flickering glow cast soft shadows across the room, and everything felt strangely intimate. Ethan looked at her and said quietly, "Do you ever think Daniel somehow brought us together?" Emily hesitated. "Maybe," she whispered. "Maybe he wanted us to help each other." He nodded. "That's what it feels like." It's the way he said it. So calm, so genuine, filled her chest with warmth. She didn't know what to say, so she simply smiled and turned another photo over. It was the one of her in the garden, her favorite, after that night. They continued working together until the project was done. When the book was finally published months later, it received praise for its honesty and tenderness. The title was Through the Lens of Healing. The dedication read, "For Emily, who taught me that light always returns, no matter how dark the moment." When she read it, tears filled her eyes. She hadn't realized until that moment how much she had influenced him, and how much he had changed her. Ethan's career flourished, but he still spent most of his time in the small town where it all began. The bond they shared never faded. It simply grew quieter, deeper, more meaningful. They became each other's constant, not defined by labels but by understanding. One afternoon, as they walked through the garden that had seen so much of their story, Emily said softly, "You know, I think Daniel would have liked this, seeing us both happy again." Ethan smiled, looking at her with gentle eyes. "I think he would too." They stood there for a long time, the sunlight spilling between the leaves, the scent of lavender in the air. Neither needed to speak. The silence said everything: gratitude, love, and peace. And as the camera clicked one final time, capturing that quiet moment, Emily realized something beautiful. Healing had led her to a new kind of love. Not one that replaced the past, but one that honored it, because sometimes life doesn't give you what you expect, it gives you what you need. And through that lens, both she and Ethan had finally found their light again.